Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this Defense Innovation Board public meeting. My name is Dr. Marina Theodotou, and I'm the Executive Director and Federal Designated Officer for the Defense Innovation Board. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded so that members of the public can attend the meeting virtually now or view later. Thank you to the Defense Media Agency for providing their expert support, and to my team and all involved to bring you this event today. The board will now convene in its public session. First, I would like to make some procedural remarks. This board is a discretionary independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government Sunshine Act. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Registered Notice posted on July 9th, 2024. There have been no significant changes to the meeting's agenda as it is posted on the Federal Registered Notice. The public was invited to submit written comments for the board members to consider, and we received 3 public comments in advance of today's meeting, which we will review during the meeting. As a reminder, these are comments to the board and not a question and answer session. These comments have been posted to the DIB website, Defense Innovation Board, innovation.defense.gov. And now I would like to turn it over to the Defense Innovation Board Chair, Mr. Mike Bloomberg.
Thank you, Marina, and welcome to everyone watching this meeting online. Thanks for joining us. Let me start by saying a few words about something that's on everyone's minds. I think we're all thankful former President Trump survived Saturday's assassination attempt, but others at the rally were critically injured, and a former fire chief was killed while shielding his family, saving their lives. I think President Biden said it well on Sunday night. Violence absolutely cannot and must not be a part of America's political life. The peaceful resolution of our differences is what our democracy is all about. The job of political leaders right now is to come together and unite the country around that vital principle. Members of our armed services and Pentagon leaders understand that there is strength in unity. They embody that idea every single day, and I know everyone here will continue to do all they can to support them together with our teams. Now, speaking for the members of the Defense Innovation Board, we're all grateful for the opportunity to serve. The men and women of the U.S. military are bravely defending our freedom and protecting America's interests around the world. Our service on this board is all about doing our part to help them. And I'm glad to say we've gotten a lot done since this board came together almost 2 years ago now. We've drawn on a wealth of experiences from across the Pentagon and beyond, and as of today, we've published 6 independent studies that Secretary Austin directed us to undertake in response to specific challenges the Defense Department is facing. Those reports are not just sitting on a shelf either. By the end of this year, the department will have implemented 40% of the board's recommendations, with, we hope, more to follow. Those recommendations really run the gamut. Among other priorities, they will help the department build better long-term relationships with the private sector, speed up the adoption of technologies across the military, secure the rights to the data they produce together, and most importantly, continue to foster and sustain a culture of innovation. Today, we'll take a little more time about that culture and talk about it and the collaboration and prudent risk-taking that helps make it possible. We'll do so as we present our 2 newest reports. They are the product of dozens of interviews and hundreds of hours of research. The reports are called Aligning Incentives to Drive Faster Tech Adoption and Optimizing How We Innovate with Allies and Partners. Admiral Mike Mullen is ready to tell us about the former study, and Charles Phillips, the latter. Admiral Mullen will speak first. The other board members will have a chance to comment. Then we'll ask two guest speakers to share their insights as well. Admiral Mullen, you're up. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your leadership of this board. And to your point about we hope that these can be implemented, we certainly hope that this study will provide help in what is a significant challenge with respect to innovation in the department. I think you'll find when you read the report that actually the language is very strong, the findings and recommendations. Words like clear and present danger, risk to winning specifically, and a good chance if we don't do this and do it well, China will overtake us. We certainly, from the overall approach standpoint, it's just there are two fundamentally different cultures, both inside DoD and certainly out in the commercial sector, particularly on the startup side. And it can be, there's also a part of this that the building, I think, needs to understand much more clearly how to actually run a business and get away from the status quo being okay. We've also certainly seen that there's minimal collaboration across every aspect of what it takes to deliver capability: requirements, acquisition, programmers, budget, contracts, contractors, legislators. They're never once at the same table, and that's a huge challenge in terms of creating the kind of innovation and technology at speed that we need. The specific findings in the study, and I'll just briefly touch on them. First of all, just avoiding risk, perpetuating complacency, and preventing speed. The building is very risk averse, and the requirement is to move very, very rapidly, which is going to require a significant increase in the appetite for risk. Lacking top cover, and under leveraging the frozen middle. And I think leveraging the frozen middle from an innovation standpoint has great potential, and we need to really focus on that. And too often rewarding the status quo. Lacking innovation, an innovation career path, and mismanaging talent, particularly of the innovators. Often they can't get promoted, they can't get the good jobs, and in that frustration they oftentimes leave. It's not that they're not focused on the mission. They love the mission and they really want to try to make it better. A lack of understanding of how industry worked, I touched on that briefly before, and the detachment of innovation and the innovation requirement from the mission, and in so doing be really, flying blind, we call it. So recommendations, briefly, embrace risk. Figure out a way to do that in a way that really takes calculated, understood risk so that we can move at speed to deliver the capability that we want. Leaders have to provide top cover for innovators. We do that as mentors and leaders notionally, but for the quote-unquote mavericks that are amongst us, those that can really bring innovation, we've got to find a place for them, promote them, make sure they have a future to eventually get into positions of leadership themselves. And we've got to stop rewarding mediocrity. We need to accelerate speed, really put ourselves on the clock, and that's challenging given the overall budget cycle. We certainly understand that, but we've got to be faster in delivering that capability, almost as if we were at war. We need to create a career path for innovators. That's challenging. That's within the career paths that exist right now, and to contemplate whether we should create a separate career path for those who would innovate. Track individuals' innovation readiness levels. There is a technical, academic background on how to do this, so we don't have to make it up, and looking at the body of work that is focused on that, particularly at DAU, the Defense Acquisition University, I think is worthwhile. We need to align our mission to drive innovation very specifically, and then finally to learn from the best. There is a clear challenge in what we've certainly found, and this isn't new, in the lack of flexibility in funding, the damage, quite frankly, that continuing resolutions do year after year after year when budgets show up late to execute, almost halfway through the year. Creating that kind of flexibility, improving on that would also really, really help. And then lastly, just every aspect of who should be at the table, trusting each other to get to the right answer, to support those that are in the field, that are at sea, that are in the air, and supporting everything that we do to meet the current very, very challenging national security requirements that exist globally. And with that, Mike, that kind of covers quickly what we went through. And I want to thank the rest of the team that supported this, as well as the rest of the members of the DIB who supported this study as well.
Thank you, Michael. Would anybody have a comment? Charles, you look the same thing? Yep. Thank you very much. We have two experts that have joined us to share their thoughts on the report and our recommendations. Let's start with Alexis Bonnell. She is a Google alum, and now she leads research and development for the Air Force as its Chief Information Officer and Director of Digital Capabilities. Alexis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am speaking from experiences in life. One was spending time with our troops in our defense mission in places like in Iraq and Afghanistan. The second is actually being able to create an innovation lab at the U.S. Agency for International Development and to serve as its Chief Innovation Officer. Then, of course, as was mentioned, my time at Google. But I will tell you the reason I came back to DoD and public service was as I was working to socialize technologies like artificial intelligence and others from my vantage point at Google, what I saw was a tremendous amount of fear in government and in my DoD colleagues. And what I realized, unfortunately, especially with something like AI, is the number one thing our adversary wants is for us to be scared of our own technology. So coming back in was really a commitment to the idea of how do we reduce the fear and how do we make it easier for people to innovate. So today I'll share a couple of things that I think have been my observations and hopes. I think the first is technology has to be seen as an ally. That's something that people navigate a relationship with. Oftentimes we treat it as this technology and that technology, not understanding that we're asking people to update their identity and to, in essence, adapt who they are as they make this journey. What I think the department has done well is when you think about that type of adaptation, there is what people do, what they think, and how they feel. What we tend to do well is address what people do, meaning we make funds available or roles available, different types of training, and those really matter. But the problem is people doesn't stick, and they don't believe you until they start to change how they feel or how they think. So particularly when we think about something like artificial intelligence, one of the things I focus on is having people have their relational progress, meaning their ta-da moment, working through the uh-ohs that they're concerned about, the aha, where they realize that it's relevant to them, and then finally that moment I call ho-hum, when it becomes normal, Googling it, etc. I think one of the things that I've recognized in coming back to this role is that story also matters. Typically, our impression of risk is because we assume something's going to go badly. So one of the things that I do with my team at AFRL is before we look at using any type of technology, introducing it, embracing it, we actually get together with all the stakeholders and we write the press release. Not with the intent to put it out, but with the intent to surface the equities, the concerns, the issues, but more importantly, to be able to reorient all of the players at the table on what great would look like and really have them go in with that spirit. The second thing we do is a pre-mortem, meaning if this ends, when this ends, and everything should actually end, why will that be? Will it be because another technology has overtaken it? Will it be because it didn't work, and actually put all of those issues on the table as a way of helping someone process risk. Another thing that has been truly critical, I'm lucky enough to have had amazing top cover from Ms. Goodwine and others as we've looked to bring the first generative AI tool, Nipper GPT. And that top cover that was mentioned before is absolutely critical. It is really important not only to be able to have access to leaders, but more importantly for them to actually be partners to us as innovators. And I'm so proud of what we've been able to do together. One point that isn't mentioned very often, but I think is the most important, is the fact that I've learned that toil eats purpose faster than mission can replace it. And I think one of the ironies I found as a leader coming back in is how much toil is removed from my experience. And what that means is that when we aren't aware of the toil, we're not actually cognizant of the true risk and the true level of effort our people have to take in order to do that. And so one of the things that I'm really looking at is going back and actually saying, how is it, that we experience and that I can experience all the toil, because without taking away all of the extra, it becomes very different to do something new or novel. Another element that I've recognized is that we tend, when we have a low relationship with risk, we make people do more things to ensure less risk. And that just simply adds to the toil. And quite frankly, it disincentivizes the spirit to actually go on that journey and be in a discovery or curiosity state. Another element is that we tend to, in a low risk situation, we tend to give more air to critics versus doers. And so in any instance, and this is true societally as well, if you think about it, we don't watch the news, we watch 5 people's opinion about the news. We don't watch sports, we watch 3 commentators' opinion about sports. And in social media, many people get to have many opinions. If you think about it as a doer, as an innovator, it becomes very draining knowing that you're going to have, in essence, a critic army that you have to navigate. And I think that's really important. Another note that I might mention is what really drove me coming back into DoD is that I truly believe that time is a weapons platform. It's our most important weapons platform. But if we don't treat a minute as important as a missile, then we waste them and we invest them in the wrong places. One of the other challenges is that we are very good at a few things, but there are 3 things I've found an organization has to do well to thrive, and in our case, to have national security advantage. One is we have to be good at starting things. I actually think the work of this group and much of the innovation work in government is actually really good at starting things. The majority of our time and attention, though, goes to maintaining things. But the third thing, and the most important thing, if we truly want to innovate, is we have to be brave enough to stop things. And I would really challenge people to ask, what are the last thing we consciously stopped doing? To that effect, one of the things that I shared with the board and the committee was that we actually introduced a kill bonus. That sounds much sexier than it is. What it really is actually encouraging my people, where I will actually write them, a monetary bonus for bringing me something we can stop doing. Because there is only so many resources, only so much treasure, whether that is emotional, intent, talent, etc. And if we are not as heroic about being brave enough to stop things, we have nothing left to truly start things or continue them.
Any comments from the panel? Alexis, thank you.
Thank you.
And now let's hear the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Pentagon's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Michael Kanan, over to you.
Thanks so much, and thank you to the staff of the DIB and its members who I've long admired both within and outside the Pentagon's walls. It's a pleasure to be here. First, this enduring topic of aligning incentives to drive faster digital tech adoption resonates with our role here in CDO as we strive to develop policies and tools, speed solutions, scale its impact to the DoD, whether it's specifically for the warfighter or complementary business processes that unleash the warfighter. For those traditionally viewed support functions, they too are warfighter needs. I'm going to explicitly come back to this point later in my comments because it's an important nuance. But past any banner lines, this topic also strikes me on a deeply personal level, as countless times throughout my military career, being the first line of accountability for authentic questions from young, technically inclined service members like, what's my pathway? Where is the place in the mission and ecosystem? I know my skills might not be traditional or institutionally well understood, but can't they still be valued? Simply put, why doesn't my computer work? And truth be told, I've asked these questions myself, and whether grappling with them internally or again being responsive to the new generation of service members for answers, those answers, they're still tragically hard to come by. because we should be able to alleviate or satiate what is at its core a passionate, altruistic, and authentic, and when spoken aloud, courageous inquiry about the state of digital technology. And for the most part, these are not technical questions, they're human. They're organizational design, they're a clarion call for prioritization and a contemporary acknowledgement of the times that they are a change in. It's about commitment to the words spoken on every panel or public speaking event alike, that technology, no matter the type, is a human endeavor, and people are at the core of what we do. That's the challenge. And with that backdrop, in my personal view, I'd like to endeavor with the characterization of issues and subsequent takeaways that certainly will not wholesale solve the underlying problem, but might material help. So here goes. And almost without fail, every conversation on the topic of technical talent centers on new hiring strategy. And those are important. But what about the people we have? The conversation cannot begin and end in only considering new hiring strategies. Instead, in what is, albeit rather unfun bureaucratic work, of reassessing current roles by redefining current performance metrics, valuing reskilling and upskilling, and focusing on process improvement and technological adoption as the job measurements. And that means annual performance reviews. The DoD doesn't have the luxury of looking at bonuses or corporate profit margins on a 10K statement to shareholders. Our capital currency often boils down to the narrative words in a mission well done and the inherent reward functions therein that serve as a litmus test on whether I was a good sailor, soldier, airman, marine, guardian, or civilian at the end of every year. But the rigidity of performance reviews, particularly as it relates to military personnel, is a fundamental stumbling block. They remain in nature unchanged and not based on the nuanced demands of various positions, career fields, or the demands of changing times. Whether it's an acquisition professional, an intelligence analyst, human resources specialist, or a fighter pilot, the evaluation form is uniform. First takeaway. I recommend reconsidering what is measured and making at least some component unique to career fields and dynamically updatable, at least in an add-on capacity, to the foundation of what we otherwise measure, with mostly standardized depictions of, quote, leading people or improving the unit. Now, caveat, I'm not saying these aren't absolutely vital to a well-functioning military. Leadership matters. I'm just saying that perhaps there can be something more. But for one to measure what matters, we also need to be continuously informed about the evergreen, ever-changing technological landscape. Bottom line, education matters. But it too struggles for priority in the budgeting process, which I think reveals the underlying difficulty of quantifying, communicating continuous learning's ROI in a form fashion that resonates, whether that's with lawmakers or military budgets. Now, initiatives like Digital University and the Air Force MIT AI Accelerator Phantom Internship Program, these exemplify the value of such investments, and they, along with other nascent efforts you can find throughout the DoD, warrant further expansion. As I often like to say, you can't hack the bureaucracy unless you understand the bureaucracy. And an educated workforce must be the ones to build an environment that supports the adoption of technology. The second takeaway, prioritize and fund education. Which brings me to acquisitions. Concerning, you can insert AI, quantum, automation, or whatever digital expression technology you might choose, for we are squarely in a world in which data writes the software. We like to call it AI, but at its core, that's all we're talking about, math. And sure, perhaps that seems like an oversimplification, but it's a profound change if you take a moment to sit back with it. So in acquisitions concerning data, software, and chiefly AI-enabled capabilities, again, this era of data writes the software, it's in my view that the situation might be a little more straightforward than often perceived. Consider any AI-related requirement, be it computer vision or a large language model. The usual inquiry in the Pentagon discussions, well, I'll tell you, it goes something like this. Is this a 3,400 operations and maintenance requirement or a 3,600 research, test, and evaluation requirement? Colors of money. Upon which the response for anything emergent, and especially AI, generally learns to 3,600. However, I think this binary distinction misses the point because, as an example, AI activities themselves inherently and definitionally span both categories. That's to say, give me a requirement statement, and I'll coherently argue that it's a research function and operations function, not in the monolithic spirit of the requirement, but rather its stage of the process, like benchmarking versus training on operational data. The third takeaway, the DoD requires bold and clear recognition that AI encompasses both O&M and RDT&E. And moreover, there's a noticeable disconnect when the DoD advocates for commercial technology. Yet when it comes to brass tacks proposals, contracts, and acquisition strategies, this stance doesn't always materialize. And the question is why? The fourth takeaway, The DoD should rigorously reassess all rationale behind opting for traditional procurement methods over those encouraging commercial solutions, for example, in FAR Parts 10 and 12. And to get really legalese for a moment, in accordance with 10 U.S. Code 2377, there is a mandate for ongoing market research and preference for commercial items across pre-solicitation, solicitation, and task order phase of delivery. The justification and tools to change exist, and hence a refreshed enterprise-wide directed review of its adherence, since commercial capabilities have changed so quickly, I think might be an effective means to an end for modular and commercially friendly strategies that should be taking place more often. And I know that was a lot of acquisition nerd-like speak, but truly the tactical choices today are the strategic decisions for tomorrow. And with all that said, everyone will tell you that everything needs to change. I just did it. But there is a flip side to that argument that might be more insightful about what doesn't need to change in an effort to preserve maneuver space in an uncertain future. Think of it akin or analogous to the foresight of the 1900s presidents Roosevelt and Wilson establishing the national parks to preserve green space. For like the industrial onslaught then, there exists a prevailing human bias for action and novelty, particularly related to AI, for more change, more policy, that leads to misconceptions like the need for entirely new cyber risk frameworks or rhetoric to completely overhaul the rules of engagement for warfare, which is usually spurred on by the overestimation of AI capabilities or just simply sci-fi machinations. In practical reality, and hear this now, the most profound AI impacts will inevitably be whether professionals from all walks of business learn it sooner or later in the back office functions, at least in the short term. But it's an area overlooked for its lack of glamour compared to warfighting applications. And these tasks that clutter the mission offer a lower barrier to entry and present less risk. For instance, using AI to detect anomalies in staffing projections is technically the same pipeline development process and deployment, or at least should be ideally, as in identifying gaps in intelligence. Precisely speaking, what does that entail? Personnel generating form templates, intelligence analysts doing language translation, pilots scheduling sorties, logisticians, depot maintenance and review autoform, budget, finance, acquisition professionals, redundancies and natural language questions about programs and plans, cyber, continuous monitoring and authorizations to operate, military assessments, install Python for better pivot tables, and speechwriters quit writing speeches from nothing, and chaplains have better sermons. The fifth takeaway, AI will most impact what is seemingly least compelling from the clickbait headline perspective. And in closing, this generation will not likely be the Ender's Game heroes of lore. But if the next generation doesn't have the opportunity to be, then we failed them. The call to action is to set the conditions with contemporary software requirements, compute resources, and data structuring that enable modern forms of software, and then adamantly communicate that as not a tangible thing, but the end state expression of an IT journey for which foundations matter first. How do we align incentives? What does the future look like? Who predicted generative AI? I'd be hubris to say we have all the answers, but I do know that too many people in too many places are having too hard of time, air quotes here, installing it. And that's the essential spirit of the problem to address. The cultural norms of risk aversion and cost schedule of performance exist because we allow them to. It's a supposed way we are good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. Obligate it, exercise it, plan it up front. We got it all right. It will go exactly as envisioned. But I leave you with this. The question is not whether we are risk averse, but rather is that a euphemism for risk blind? Shift the narrative to one about blindness and not what might be lost by the operative word here, trade-off, but instead what is lost because we haven't made the trade-off. Accelerating the adoption of digital technologies means some things will have to come to their overdue end. And if that's going to happen, well, change what people are measured by. And with that, I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Any comments from the panel? Your comments, Michael, on our wonderful staff and all of the people who dedicate their lives to protecting America is fascinating. Thank you. We'll now have a vote on the recommendations, and I will call each member, and you can vote yay or nay. First, Mac Thornberry. Aye. Gilda Barabino.
Aye.
Ryan Swan.
Aye.
Mary Meeker.
Aye.
Charles Phillips.
Aye.
Michael Mullen.
Aye.
A virtual participant, Will Roper.
Aye, and the speakers were great.
Thank you. And virtual participant Sue Gordon.
Aye.
Thank you. It passes. That concludes the first study. We'll now turn to Charles Phillips to tell us about the Allies and Partners study, and then he'll be followed by two more guests. Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Allies and Partners study was an effort to recalibrate and relook at how we work with other countries. So fellow board members that worked on this program was Mary Meeker, the Honorable Sue Gordon, and Dr. Will Roper, who are online. We also had a lot of help from Jacob Savage and Elliot Silverberg, Jacob Sharp rather, on the staff. So we talked to a lot of different organizations to get the sense of how it's working today. Other countries, Norway, UK, Ukraine even, our allies in many different areas of the DoD, different agencies, the State Department, the Commerce Department, and then some startups trying to work with the DoD from outside of the U.S. and find out how to work with us. So the number one issue we found is that there's no pathway for working with the DoD if you're coming from another country. No one knows how it works. It's too fragmented, and there's a lot of different certifications and requirements. I'll get to that in just 1 second. The important reason why it's important to rethink how we're doing this now is the context of where we're operating. So if you look at China, this is all in the report as well, 37 of the 44 critical technologies identified by a third-party research organization, China is leading. If you look at high-end systems adoption, they're moving 6x faster. They're now coordinating with Russia, North Korea. The three of them collectively have 1.6 billion citizens. And so the rate and scale of their investment has just changed. And so one way to respond to that is if we can collectively work with our partners, we can recreate that scale a different way. So what does that mean? It means shared systems and equipment, but also shared data. What are the reasons to do that? So number one, it creates a much larger addressable market. We need more private companies and vendors to view this market as something worth investing in, building capacity. They don't do that for small units. If you have a lot of units and it's a bigger market, their ROI is different. They've told us that many different times. And so an addressable market, it's changed if you have common equipment. Two, there's federated innovation around all of our partners. We used to think we were the only ones innovating. That's the wrong way to think about it now. In recent years, especially the last year, we've gotten equipment from Norway to help on 155 rounds. We've worked with Israel, lots of different examples they told us about. We need to be aware of what our partners are doing, and then where possible, let's coordinate our research and engineering. Number three, foreign military sales in the U.S. is an $81 billion market of what we export there, so it creates jobs here. And then fourth is our supply chain resiliency. There's a finite number of repair parts and suppliers. When we get into a war, we need to replenish that. They have limited capacity. If we had more partners working with us in more distributed ways to manufacture it, we have to be more resilient longer term. We're too reliant on some of our adversaries for some of the components as well, such as lithium coming from China and Russia. So we need to rethink the supply chain. Our partners can help with that. The good news is we do have an example where it's starting to work well. There's a project called AUKUS. So AUKUS is a combination of UK, US, and Australia to build a nuclear-powered submarine. But it has two pillars. That's pillar one. Pillar two is longer term, can we learn how to coordinate on development and research around 8 different areas such as cyber, AI, quantum, for instance. And so that part has not yet been figured out. This is still very new, but we can come up with processes on how to share data. Maybe we can build around that. So what are the barriers? The barriers that we see. One of it is culture, because we're used to building our own technology, not invented here syndrome. Foreign technology is viewed with suspicion. We work more easily with people with common languages, so what's called the 5 Eyes, and certainly we have not looked as broadly as we could have, and now the situation has changed. We have partners like Germany and Japan that want to work with us given what's going on in the world. Two, we make it hard to work well with the DoD. The compliance standards, things called CMMC and ITAR, export controls, even for U.S. companies, sometimes 6 years to get approvals. And so we'll get to that in just a second, our recommendations on that. Classifications, we automatically classify information as no foreign dissemination, without any analysis beyond that. So looking at all those issues, we've come up with a couple of recommendations. In 2018, we split the Undersecretary for Acquisitions, Technology, and Logistics into 2 different organizations. One is Acquisitions and Sustainment, the other one is Research and Engineering. We'd like to recombine those for Undersecretary of Industrial and International Cooperation. The reason is we need integrated designs, we need integrated manufacturing capacity around the world. It's hard to do that in separate organizations. And secondly, they need a single point of contact who can make decisions, what are we building and how do we plan to design it, who's working on it, what research is happening. And trying to do that right now is far too difficult for partners. It's actually difficult for internally as well. We have some smaller recommendations as well. Justifications for non-exportability. When we say something can't be exported, let's make sure that that's indeed the case. We have a program called Buy American. With good reasons, people want to have compare parts, granular repair parts and components built in the U.S., but sometimes that can slow innovation and sometimes it's not available and the capacity is simply not there. There are exception process to that, but that takes years as well. In addition, we want to align expert networks. The Commerce Department, for instance, is investing in manufacturing segments. Some of that could be dual-use technology if DoD knew about it. Let's connect those two networks. And then we want to create international defense innovation, a community of experts that we can collaborate and talk to each other. We have some suggestions on how to reform ITAR and how to reform CMMC, the security standards. And we need there are third-party assessments that are done by consultants in the U.S. to certify that you're compliant with these standards. Those third parties need to exist internationally as well. So with that, those are our recommendations.
Thank you, Charles. Any comments from the panel? Yes.
Mr. Chairman. Like the last study, I think this study highlights an area of innovation that has not gotten a lot of attention and is a very accurate but also stark description of the problem. It's hard to be a friend to the United States, as Charles has laid out. The only point I want to make, as he mentioned, one of his recommendations is to reverse a decision Congress made a few years ago regarding the organizational structure within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I participated in that decision, and I've got qualms on going back because I know the arguments back and forth and came to a different conclusion. Having said that, I think the study is absolutely on the right track in all other areas, should be supported. And again, highlights a very important issue that not a lot of other studies have.
Mac, thank you very much for those comments, and you were there, and we can hold you responsible. The next speaker is, we're fortunate to have join us, is a longtime member of the NATO team. He now serves as the Acting Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid, and Cyber. James Unpathy-Ray, thanks for taking the time. Over to you.
So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this very respected group of people. And it's a topic that's really close to our hearts here. So let me just give you maybe 3-4 minutes on how we're approaching this issue, and then I'd be very, of course, open to any questions or comments that you might have. So a few years ago, what we took was a couple of decisions to help foster the pipeline of innovation and get startups in particular through the Death Valley, with which you're all familiar. One was to set up something we call Diana, which is a little bit like a transatlantic DARPA. The United States is participating in that, where we're working with startups, bringing them through test centers and accelerator sites, providing them funding so that they can have dual-use technologies available for us. Second is a €1 billion deep tech innovation fund, so patient capital, to look for cutting-edge technological solutions. Canada is about to join. The United States, I know, is considering this in Congress, and we're looking very much forward to the United States joining as well. And we'll get to France when they have a slightly more settled political situation, but we're getting there. We have 24 countries in it now. But this is about stocking the shelves. What we are now turning our focus on is someone buying what's on the shelves at the speed of relevance. And we're quite concerned about the speed of relevance. I've been speaking to some startups that are supporting Ukraine. In fact, just recently at the Washington Summit, when I participated in the industry forum, and they were saying that there's a 2-week innovation cycle for software in Ukraine. So they're putting a certain amount of software into drones. it's being neutralized by the Russians in 2 weeks, and then they have to come up with a new innovation and new technology. So that's the speed of the war, and we certainly need to accelerate at NATO. So we are now turning our attention to that. We got a tasker out of the NATO summit in Washington to develop a rapid adoption strategy in time for the next summit in The Hague, and that's what we, my division, and my colleagues are turning to do. And this basically has 3 elements, this challenge. One is to ensure that the EDTs that are fielded in innovation initiatives like Diana and the fund actually make it into the hands of operators when they need them and before they are obsolete. And I can tell you, if you followed every NATO procedure perfectly, for some emerging technologies, they'd be obsolete by the time they made it through the process, so we have to fix that. Second, to ensure that the startups and the small and medium-sized enterprises developing battlefield decisive EDTs are actually included in our procurement mechanisms, which have traditionally focused on the big primes. And third, to create the linkages between the capability shortfalls that we've identified and the EDT solutions that can fill those requirements, at times to bridge until a heavy metal solution that takes a while, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, to come to market. We can use EDTs to bridge to those solutions, and that will, of course, offer to the startups that have gone through our processes an actual market, because it's really important for us that we don't, as I say, stock the shelves, but then in the end, no one's buying. The message will get out quickly to the startup community that our initiatives actually don't lead to actual procurement. So we need to avoid that also for the success of our other initiatives. So what are we doing? We will focus the plan on 2 main elements. One is the political. We want out of the next year's summit to provide to our heads of state and government, which they can then agree and give direction on, clear messaging for what we need to accomplish. We believe that there needs to be clear top-down from the very top messaging about what is the speed of relevance and what everybody needs to do to actually adapt their own procedures across the NATO enterprise, and as an offer to allies to adapt. Second, to actually establish and tailor adoption pathways for NATO and allies to address novel solutions at the speed of relevance. For example, by finding new ways to include startups in our acquisition processes, as I mentioned. Second, creating avenues to better understand how EDTs can fill existing capability requirements, and developing improved processes for concept development, testing and experimentation, and developing clear procurement outcomes from the testing and evaluation. Final point, just to say we're really grateful to see that this is a priority for you, your board, and we are looking forward to your forthcoming studies, for example, on aligning incentives to drive faster tech adoption, and on optimizing how we innovate with allies and partners, exactly what you're discussing here. U.S. leadership for us is crucial, because you've done a lot of the thinking, and we've modeled a lot of our work on DIU and DIUX, but of course, because the U.S. is so far ahead of many other allies when it comes to public-private partnerships, we're looking for really strong U.S. engagement in our processes as we move to the next summit. So we would hope to keep a line open to you, and if there's anything that you could offer to us, we'd be very grateful for that.
James, thank you for those insightful comments. Any comments from the panel?
James, just for clarification, what's an EDT?
Sorry, emerging and sorry, I'm in my acronyms, emerging and disruptive technologies. So we have identified here at NATO 7, which we consider to be kind of game-changing, from artificial intelligence to autonomy to quantum, and we've just set up a transatlantic quantum community in which the U.S. has taken a leadership role as well to try to foster transatlantic cooperation in these technologies in these areas. And we have, for example, a test center in the Netherlands, the Niels Bohr Institute, which is probably the world leader. And so startups can come there from anywhere around the alliance, including the US. If you've got young folks that have an interesting quantum technology that they need to test, they can bring it there, and the scientists there will test it and help them improve it. And then they can take it to an accelerator site and help spin that up into a business. So that's kind of the way we're trying to orient ourselves.
Let's show up. James? Show up.
So,
Show up at that place to test. Have we?
Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen.
Yeah. Have we taken advantage of it from a U.S. perspective?
Sorry, no, only because Diana, I'd say two things. One is Diana, our DARPA, has only now issued its second set of challenges. It got 1,300 startups applying, which we were quite gratified to see. They chose 44, and they're now in their first 6-month contracts from Diana. And so they're only now being moved into the testing centers. And a new set of challenges was just issued last week. So now they have to filter through all the applications to come up with them. So it will happen, and it is open to all U.S. Startups in this space. But it's the baby's just starting to walk.
James Michael's question was, do the American innovators and entrepreneurs participate?
Yes, it is open to them, absolutely. And there are U.S. test centers and U.S. accelerator sites as well. So the U.S. is a fully participating member.
Great. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Navy Captain Colin Kane. He serves in the Pentagon's Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, which moves quickly to meet Secret Service members' most urgent technological needs. Captain Kane, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My name is Captain Colin Kane. I work in the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. I'm the Chief of Staff there. I work for Major General Edward Vaughn. What we do is accelerate the fielding of urgent needs for combatant commanders, and we also manage the Senior Integration Group process for the Department of Defense. So we also manage the Joint Urgent Operational Needs, which are the critical requirements that the combatant commanders are identifying and say that they need that most urgently to address an immediate battlefield problem. I think one of the challenges there is that innovation is also slow, and so we're supposed to field solutions within 2 years to those environments, and it's an extremely challenging thing to achieve there. And one of the things that we can do as well, and we're seeing in the senior integration groups, is the fielding of items to Ukraine. We manage the senior integration group for Ukraine, and delivering those capabilities, as we said, that their 2-week cycle for innovation is a very challenging thing. Russia is innovating extremely quickly, and we are challenged to be able to field things that support their efforts. And we are continually working to field capabilities to them, and we are engaging with the industry to be able to do that. I think, Major General Vaughn spoke at the Defense Innovators Forum in Poland back in June. And in that environment, he emphasized the need for our innovation and ability to field those capabilities and to partner with industry to move those efforts forward. I think just in my naval experience, we are also challenged from the sharing of information. We see that sharing information to Ukraine may not be relevant to their targeting needs, and being able to have them address a threat that's imposed upon their members out in the field trying to address that. I'm also seeing, in terms of my own experience as an acquisition professional, that we're not plugged in, and we're trying to pull into the industry and the cooperation with the research and engineering directorate within OSD to be able to field urgent needs for the counter uncrewed system threat. In that environment, we're seeing extremely quick innovation, and in partnership with the Research and Engineering Directorate, there isn't since we separated OSD A&S from R&E, we aren't seeing the ability to, or effective means of communication to move in that effort. So to your point, sir, earlier, combining those two organizations, there would be benefit, and I think unity of effort that moves us in a direction that helps us to make those things more effective and get industry clearly moving the things that are being innovated by our FFRDCs and UARCs into an effort that is more aligned to what the Defense Department's requirements are. We have got to make sure that we are basically leading the target, and perhaps right now we're shooting to the left of the target in terms of being able to bring those capabilities and field them faster. There's not a path that clearly gets those innovations that are being fielded or developed by our FFRDCs and UARCs to have that feed into the POM process, to be able to then go into a program of record. And as we talked about, there's issues in terms of not invented here kind of syndrome, and being able to move those items into those programs, because we are very committed to the programs that we develop, is an observation that I would share with you. We like them, they mean jobs, there's different things with that. But taking perhaps a slightly innovative approach, using some of the technologies that we discussed in terms of AI and how that can inform, using AI encoding, which can speed our program instead of a program taking months. I mean, we're talking to industry and they're developing coding and they're fielding code on an hourly basis. That's what Amazon and Google and some of these other entities are doing. And if we can't get to that, I talked to a guy today, he's fielding code in 3 months. That's the fastest I've ever heard anyone in DoD doing that in actuality. And if we can't work with industry, work with them to also stop making snowflake systems in terms of the systems being developed and not using a consistent automated process to load each one of them. This feeds into our programs like Replicator, which is out there, and industry is working quickly to innovate things. But if you aren't having an automated process to keep loading those systems, so you get an exact replication of the system that you're building, then you're not going to have an effective system. It's not going to work the way you expect it to. I've seen this challenge on Navy ships, the Canes system. Canes is an example of a program that, there's an individual that goes onto the ship and loads the program and gets us, and each ship has its own version of Canes because the process isn't automated. It's a different individual that goes onto the ship and loads that, as an example. So we need to be more flexible with adopting AI, working with our allies and partners to be able to bring them into the fold and share the information with them as we do this innovation, and being less afraid to do that. And I agree, we do have a great reluctance to do that. I think the other thing is to feed into the whole discussions earlier about AI is our program managers don't have the education about AI and how it can accelerate their program development. And without that, I mean, we try to protect jobs is what I see a lot of, but if we actually were to adopt AI, use that to develop the code that we do, we field the systems much faster, and we actually then can focus on more things because the code's written and it's fielded and is delivered to us. And then we can also share those systems in a much more rapid pace with our allies and partners to address the needs in the EUCOM AOR, in the CENTCOM AOR, and also in the INDOPACOM AOR, which is probably our most challenging environment given the geographic spread over there. It's those kinds of things that enabling that and developing those relationships and taking also the perspective of the allies and partners in those regions to inform things, because they have a unique perspective on how things look from their foxhole, we'll say, and how they address those things, and it may change how they would code something or approach a problem, and that's going to feed into us and make our overall solution to how we fight and win wars in those regions a much better answer than, kind of going it alone and developing those answers as we have historically done. So I appreciate your time. I hope those are a couple of ideas that can help move us in a direction that addresses program management and adoption of AI and developing those relationships with allies and partners. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Captain, thank you. I think your comments regarding the time frame that's taking place between Ukraine and Russia in a couple of weeks, when we're talking about years to do the same thing, and the lack of ability to have somebody come on board and quickly fix something because you're someplace else in the world. We have in the private sector generally somebody right next door who can just walk out or do it by video quickly. That's not the environment that you talked about.
Well, and we also need to consider adoption of the ability to software update over the air. The Navy is developing some processes for doing that, but we need to be more willing to accept those kinds of things. And I think technology is there to validate that and prevent a threat actor from introducing malicious code into the process. And those kinds of things, I think, help us to innovate and be able to deliver capability to us while we're deployed, and be able to enable greater engagement capability for ships or different weapon systems that we have deployed to address the fight, sir.
Well, I think you can really do a service for the country if you keep pushing us to modernize and do things that are possible but innovative, and big organizations don't do that very well. So I understand why it takes place and why it takes a while to get them in, but if you keep fighting for it, you'll be doing the country a great service. So thank you very much. Any comments from the rest of the team? Okay, Captain, thank you. And we're now going to vote on the recommendations. First, Mac Thornberry.
Aye.
Gilda Barabino.
Aye.
Ryan Swan.
Aye.
Mary Meeker.
Aye.
Mike Mullen.
Aye.
Charles Phillips.
Aye.
Virtual participant Will Roper.
Aye.
And virtual participant Sue Gordon.
Aye.
The motion is carried, and that concludes the second study for the day. And now, Marina, would you please share some of the public comments that we have received?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have received, as we mentioned earlier, we received public comments. We actually had to welcome comments per the Federal Advisory Act until 12 noon on July 12th. We received 3 comments, and I'd like to share one which is relevant to the study from David Turkovic in academia, who is asking how does the DoD plan to align incentives to drive faster tech adoption when funds for basic 6.1 and applied 6.2 research have been consistently cut. So that's a good question. Thank you to all the citizens that provide their feedback. We welcome your feedback, and we collate and provide that back to the board for consideration. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over back to you to provide us the closing remarks.
Well, thank you. Today's final agenda item is to share 2 topics that the board may tackle next. One of the department's priorities is to open the door to more non-traditional companies, the smaller technological companies, as opposed to the big prime contractors. So we'll be thinking about how the department can attract more non-traditional companies as partners. And another topic to be tackled is a problem getting a lot of coverage in the press. In many cases, U.S.-made drones are failing in the Ukraine as Russia's brutal invasion grinds on. And so we'll also be thinking about how the military can develop more effective and less expensive drones, and how we can spur the market to produce a whole heck of a lot more of them. And we'll be looking forward to getting to work on those potential new studies this summer. Members, is there anything you would like to add? If not, thank you for our public meeting today, and as always, let me thank Secretary Lloyd Austin, Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks, Undersecretary Heidi Shue, and the entire Defense Innovation Board team for guiding us through such a productive day. Our next public meeting, you can put on your calendar, it will take place sometime in the winter, and as soon as we get a specific date, we will announce it. So until then, all the best, and thank you for the members in particular.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.